Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. It is a great privilege to join you at this symposium, albeit virtually, and speak with you about a passion of mine. In February last year, I had in fact planned a research trip to Japan to explore applications of the very topic I am speaking to you about today. But of course, COVID put a stop to that. I am still hopeful I will be able to make it to Japan in the next year or two to pursue this research. First, a little bit about me. In many ways, I owe my academic career to my time living and studying in Japan as a young adult. I came to live in Japan when I was 17 in the north of Kyoto, the Yama, people used to say, near Kyoto Sangyo University. My father, a university lecturer, was doing 1 year's research sabbatical there. I have fond memories of the seasons as they passed, my first experience of 4 distinctive seasons. I have especially fond memories of the cacophony of frogs and bullfrogs singing from the paddy fields and ponds in spring. But without doubt, my favourite season was autumn, when the maple trees turned vivid shades of red, orange, and yellow. I stayed on in Japan to study at university in Osaka, eventually returning to New Zealand in 1995 following the double calamities of the Great Hanshin earthquake in January and the sarin gas attack in March of that year. It was not until a number of years later I decided to do some postgraduate studies at the University of Canterbury, and for my thesis topic, my supervisor suggested examining the apparent paradox between the veneration of nature in Japan's art and literature on the one hand, and the history and continued destruction of nature on the other. I went on to do a doctorate examining the relationship between Asiatic black bears and, by extension, the realm of Yama, and humans through history. It was through this research that I encountered the fascinating concept of Satoyama, that realm of semi-cultivated nature where wild nature and human-constructed landscapes intersect. This concept of Satoyama has inspired me in my exploration of nature restoration for human well-being, which I talk more about in my presentation. My experience living and studying in Japan also made me acutely aware of the cultural context from which we view and interpret the world. Without this experience, I don't think I would have understood this at the intuitive level, which has enhanced my academic inquiry. Unlike my inquiry into environmental history, my research into the connection between nature and well-being came from a more intuitive place. I knew firsthand the power of being in nature, the positive effect it has on mood, clarity of mind, and sense of calm. I am very fortunate to have 2 homes. One in a town next to a large urban stream, which is being restored through the planting of native trees, and the other, our little country cottage, which includes a gully at the bottom of which there is a little stream and regenerating forest, and at night a phenomenal display of glowworms. My family and I are working together to remove pest species, both animals and plants, and allow the indigenous forest, largely obliterated from lowland New Zealand, to regenerate there. What I wasn't aware of when I began this journey of inquiry into the link between nature and well-being was just how significant the body of evidence was. Of course, as humans, we have known about the benefits of being in nature for many centuries. We need to look no further than the Zen temple gardens or the sacred groves of Shinto shrines to know that in Japan, This understanding is deeply ingrained in the culture, even if people do not always have the opportunity to act on or benefit from it in their daily lives. Here I present just a sweeping overview of the research linking nature and well-being as it has unfolded in the modern era. Much of this has been led by researchers in the field of psychology in the United States. One of the very earliest studies is the hospital window view study undertaken by psychologist Roger Ehrlich in the 1980s. In this study, he monitored the response of patients to views of trees and gardens from their windows, finding that patients with a view of nature reported better mood and more positive feelings compared to those without a view. This research led him to develop the stress reduction theory, which proposes that looking at scenery containing natural elements, such as trees, plants, or water, creates positive emotions and feelings, such as interest, pleasure, and calm, and has a restorative effect, thereby easing our state of alert following a stressful situation. Also in the 1980s, environmental psychology researchers Rachel and Stephen Kaplan were forging a related but slightly divergent theoretical path through their research into nature and well-being. Their theory was that interacting with nature allows our cognitive mind to rest, making us feel less stressed and less anxious, and therefore happier. They called this attention restoration theory. They believed that landscapes that were most effective in creating this response were ones that engender what they termed soft fascination, an element of mystery that entices the mind's attention rather than demanding it as many stimuli in contemporary life do. An example of such a landscape is a winding forest path, a view partially concealed by foliage, or a stream that meanders out of sight. Since the work of these pioneering researchers, there have been a multitude of studies, mainly in the United States and Europe, but increasingly in Asia too, especially here in Japan and also South Korea. Overall, studies have found exposure to nature or urban green space leads to improvements in mood, lower levels of stress, reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety, and improved cognition in children with attention deficits and individuals with depression. Researchers here in Japan, led primarily by Ching Lee, Nippon Medical School, and Yoshifumi Miyazaki, University of Chiba, have focused on how forest therapy, known originally as Shinrin-yoku in Japan, leads to increased activity of natural killer cells, a type of white blood cell that plays a vital role as part of the body's defense system, attacking infections and tumors, and elevates hormones that may be protective against heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. However, while many of these studies find improvements in various health outcomes in the short term, few studies have tracked health improvements over the long term. One study that is worthy of note from this perspective is a Danish study published in 2019, which found that children who grow up surrounded by green spaces are less likely to develop mental health disorders as adults. This was after adjusting for other known risk factors, including urbanization, socioeconomic factors, family history of mental illness, and parental age. The results of the study indicating an independent association with green space. So, what do we do with this knowledge? New Zealand is renowned for its scenic beauty and large expanses of nature, But because our lowland forest was largely destroyed to make way for pastoral farming, most of this nature is in mountainous areas, hours from the nearest towns and cities. On the other hand, like Japan, New Zealand is highly urbanized. About 86% of New Zealanders live in cities or towns, where there is very little nature, at least not in its original indigenous form. So through my book, public talks and other channels, I urge the need to reintegrate nature into the places we live so that we don't have to travel hours to get to nature, but rather experience nature as part of our everyday lives. In many cases, this means restoring degraded landscapes such as streams, gullies, wetlands, and estuaries. But it also means designing our cities differently, making it possible for people to walk or cycle rather than travel by vehicle, and to pass through areas of nature on the way to school, work, the shops, or the train station. This image is an artist's impression of how a proposed river park in Eastern Christchurch, effectively a restored wetland forest, could look like. This is where the 2011 earthquake, in which Japanese students tragically also died, caused liquefaction across much of the city, making it unsafe to develop for housing or commercial use. The area was once a vast expanse of wetland between two braided rivers. And through its awesome seismic forces, the earthquake effectively returned the land to its original form. Living in Japan, I often found respite for the soul quite unexpectedly when I came across a small shrine or a temple hidden away in the dense cityscape. Invariably, these spiritual oases were also oases of nature, with small groves of trees carefully protected from development. The experience of these places often gives me inspiration when thinking about how to integrate nature into our urban landscapes. They show that they don't have to be huge spaces, but we do need more of them. They may be on rooftops, along abandoned railway corridors, or along urban streams. Streams in particular offer valuable opportunities for restoration and accessible nature interaction, but are also unique as a recreation space because their linear nature effectively makes them linear parks. From an ecological perspective, they also offer a valuable opportunity to create and enhance interconnected mountains to sea habitat for indigenous species such as birds, reptiles, insects, and fish. Such green oases not only offer respite for adults amidst their busy, pressured lives, they also offer places of wonderment and mystery for our children. And that brings me to a central idea in my research: what we mean by nature. For the purposes of my book, I found nature writer Richard Louve's definition useful. Louve defines nature in the following way. When I use the word nature in a general way, I mean natural wildness, biodiversity, abundance, related loose parts in a backyard or a rugged mountain ridge. Most of all, nature is reflected in our capacity for wonder. And once again, when I think about this capacity for wonder, an example from Japan, this time from popular culture, springs to mind. I think of the wonder and mystery of Totoro's forest grove in the classic movie Tonari no Totoro. And my challenge to all of us here is to recreate some of that wonder through nature in the cities in which we live. And that concludes my talk. Thank you for listening.